Director of Digital News Media at Signal Media. Welcome to the Disruptive by Design podcast. Signal is the official news outlet of FCA International. In this episode of Disruptive by Design, I'm speaking with Michelle Curran. Michelle, whose call sign is Mace, spent 14 years in the U.S. Air Force, first as an F-16 pilot, and then as a Thunderbird demonstration pilot for 3 years, with over 2,000 flight hours. Michelle talked about how she decided to go into the Air Force through ROTC in college, and how actually she had studied criminal justice with plans of going into the FBI, but how her path turned to becoming a fighter pilot, where sometimes she was the only female in her class. She talked about facing social anxiety and overcoming imposter syndrome, and how she realized she could dictate a better future for herself instead of listening to her fears. So I loved her advice about how to take steps, even small steps at first, to go outside your comfort zone and have the confidence to reach for bigger dreams and put the hard work in. And Michelle's stance as a role model for young kids, especially young girls, is really tremendous. She's written a children's book called Upside Down Dreams and plans to write 2 more. It's from Endgame Press, and I would highly recommend that you add it to your gift list, to your local library, or to a youngster in your life. It's really a beautiful book, and it's so great because it shows the possibility of where kids may go that they haven't considered before. And, Michelle's lesson is important. It's for all of us to reach big. And with that, welcome to Disruptive by Design with Mace, Michelle Curran. Hi, everybody. I'm sitting down today with Michelle Curran. She is a former fighter pilot and a former lead solo for the Thunderbirds. Hi, Michelle. How are you today?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. You're pretty accomplished, but kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. Kind of, even going back, like what were you like as a kid? Start us on your trail of, your path in life, I guess.
Sure. We'll go way back to as a kid. I mean, people see what I ended up going on and doing professionally. And then when I tell them what I was like as a kid, they're usually surprised. I was very shy and introverted and awkward, and I had social anxiety, and I was like definitely a wallflower in social settings at school. I was also very focused and driven though, which came out later in life and probably how I ended up being able to do what I did. But I was really adventurous. So when I wasn't at school, when I was at home, I was climbing trees and jumping off of things, and I loved roller coasters. And as soon as I was old enough, I went skydiving. So I was just adventurous. And then in school, I got really good grades. I just made academics a priority, and I was really focused on kind of achieving things, I guess, which allowed me to have a decent GPA and eventually get an Air Force ROTC scholarship. But there was kind of a little bit of a dichotomy there between being very driven and adventurous, but also being kind of painfully awkwardly shy.
Right, sure. And I guess I think the military does an amazing job of making leaders, but how did you kind of evolve that shyness and introvertedness, I guess?
It took time, so much time. And I mean, I still have moments even today where I'll get in my head and, be in an environment where I know I should raise my hand and speak up and share my idea or whatever. And I'll do what many people find themselves doing, where you just keep thinking about what you're about to say over and over until you like have too much stress to actually say it, which is so silly because what's the repercussions of raising your hand and contributing to a conversation? Pretty much nothing, especially when you compare it to the high stakes situations I've been in the Air Force. So, but I think early in my career, exactly what you said, the Air Force, the military in general, forces you outside of your comfort zone. You are doing that on a daily basis. And especially when you're going through the formal training programs early in your career. So, it started as ROTC for me, being forced to be assertive, to be put on the spot, to lead formations, that kind of thing. So there was, a lot of growth then during college, but then getting into Air Force pilot training, even more so. Like, you're the commander of that aircraft. You have to, even if you're not type A, you have to act like you're type A. And so I think there was a long period of time, the first few years of my flying career where I kind of just did fake it till you make it. You know, I talk about it now as I like played dress up, because I eventually, we're getting a little bit ahead, but I eventually got F-16s and went on to be a fighter pilot. And especially in that environment, which everyone has an idea of what the culture is like because they've all seen Top Gun. That, takes some Hollywood creative liberties there, of course, but it is a little bit like that. There is, some of the bravado, there are some of the egos. And so I played dress up to fit into that community because that's not my natural personality. And there was a lot of just forcing myself to do the thing that I know someone should do in this situation, even though it didn't feel super authentic. So that eventually burned out, as it does. It's fairly exhausting to pretend to be something that isn't just who you really are as a person. And I eventually found my people in the F-16 community, found that everyone wasn't the stereotypical type A male like I kind of imagined coming in. And, that kind of leveled out and I was able to be myself eventually. But the journey of going from being like a shy girl in a very small town. I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, about 4,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And not an aviation family, not a military family, just didn't have exposure to those things. So I didn't decide until I was about halfway through college that I actually wanted to be a pilot. That came later. I was there on an Air Force ROTC scholarship because I needed a way to pay for college. But I was planning on doing 4 years, getting out, and then my goal was to apply to the FBI Academy. And I actually went and graduated with a criminal justice degree and did not use that at all in the cockpit of an F-16. But so I was a little bit of a late bloomer when it came to figuring out, that I even wanted to pursue aviation specifically. And then it was, I would say, a decade-long journey of going from being shy and introverted to finding my footing, becoming confident in my career, and then just who I was as a person. So it did not happen overnight. I know that was the longest answer to that question.
No, I love that. That's great insight into kind of, kind of who you are as a kid and kind of how you evolve and the paths you take. And what was it about, I guess, obviously, getting an ROTC scholarship, is a key thing. Like my dad went to ROTC to, pay for his school. But how did you know you wanted to go into the Air Force? I'm sure many scholarships were maybe available to you, or you had other choices, but why Air Force, I guess?
Yeah, so when I was, I think, a junior in high school, my dad had a very frank conversation with me. He's like, "Hey, you have a good GPA. You probably are eligible for some scholarships, and we do not have a college fund for you. So let's explore options." And he had gone to UW-Madison, and he wasn't in the military, but he remembered seeing the cadets walking around campus in their uniforms. And he was like, "I think you would really do well in that environment." And my initial reaction was, I don't want to be in the military. I want to be a normal college student. And I'm like 16 years old at the time, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I don't really have a concept of how ROTC works, that you actually are just a normal college student the bulk of the time. And you occasionally, have military focused classes. But the more we looked into it, started to do some research, I was like, okay, that adventurous side came out again. And I was like, the military would be a way for me to see the world, to do things that are challenging, to, meet all these different people. I really just wanted to get out of the small town I grew up in and experience so much more. And I saw it as a way to do that. And I kind of knew the general stereotypes that most people do about the branches of service, that the Air Force is like the best quality of life. And you hear jokes about that. And I'm married to a former Marine, so we joke about it all the time, but it's definitely true to some extent. I'm like, we'd be staying at the Hilton and he'd be staying on the ground outside, right? Like that's the difference between the branches to some extent. So of course that's was appealing to me, just somewhat, I guess. But then the other thing was, I didn't know yet that I wanted to be a pilot, but the idea of aviation just felt like it fulfilled that kind of explorer spirit that I always had as a kid. Like I repeated myself like 5 times saying adventurous, but I really just loved that, like going out and experiencing new things. And I grew up outside of my small town out in the country, and I always be out exploring in the river or in the woods or whatever. And aviation just kind of had that feeling of like, even though it's so developed at this point, kind of like a frontier of just possibility. And so I think that's what really drew me to the Air Force.
Right, sure. I love that. Um, and I guess you were in college. Did you, I guess in your placement to go into the Air Force after ROTC, did you get jets right away, or what was the process there? Or how did you know when you wanted to be a pilot, and kind of then how did that evolve, I guess?
Yeah, so about halfway through ROTC, I'm a criminal justice major. I still plan on trying to go do OSI, special investigations, with the intent of going to the FBI eventually. And then we visited a base. We went to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and I got to stand on the ramp and watch two F-15s take off in full afterburner. And it was at dusk. So you have the jet noise, it just like vibrates your whole body. It gives you goosebumps. And then you have the afterburner flame coming out the back. And it was kind of just a jaw-dropping experience for me. And I was like, okay, I forget the FBI. Like, how do I go do that? And it was kind of from that point on that various points throughout the ROTC program, some of the cadre would be like, who here wants to be a pilot? And they would look for people to raise their hands. And up until that point, I had always said, oh, maybe, but criminal justice, whatever. And I hadn't raised my hand. But after that moment, for like the next semester when we were back, I started raising my hand when they said, who wants to be a pilot?
Oh.
And then I remember one of the instructors put me on the spot, which I didn't love because, again, I don't like being out in front of people, which is funny because I'm a keynote speaker now by choice. But he was like, okay, what do you want to fly? Cadet Curran, like, you want to be a pilot? What do you want to fly? And that was one of those dilemma moments where you're like, oh man, I want to fly fighter jets. Like that watching those two jets take off is what inspired this whole thing. I don't want to just be a pilot. I want to be a fighter pilot. But once you say that, you create accountability for yourself, right? Now everyone's watching. I knew the odds were not in my favor to actually make that happen, but I told him I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And he replied with some cliche joke that was like, oh yeah, you know how you'll know who the fighter pilots are in a room? And I'm like, how? And this is, my whole class is in this classroom. There's like 30 of us in here. He's like, they'll tell you. And I was like, okay, I guess here we go. I've just created, everyone's watching now to see if I follow through on this. I ended up getting a pilot slot, which is competitive, but not terribly difficult to get one. It's like GPA, physical fitness, cadet leadership. But then I went off to pilot training, and now it gets very competitive to actually get a fighter aircraft. I was a class of 25 at Columbus Air Force Base. I was the only woman in my class, which became the norm for much of my career. And looking at classes ahead of us as we approached the end of the program, where we got to find out during what we call drop night, which airframe we were going to go fly, we were seeing that other classes in recent months had gotten anywhere from 1 to 3 fighter aircraft spots for class of 25-ish. So I knew the odds were not in my favor. I also knew that I was doing pretty well, and I had worked my butt off because I went into Air Force pilot training with 0 civilian time. So yeah, drinking from a fire hose, right, to say the least. But yeah, that I fast forwarded through a lot of learning, a lot of doubt that came up at various points, but also a lot of fun. Overall, when I look back at pilot training, I just remember it being a blast. Like, yeah, because you're so new, it's so exciting. You're getting to fly all these aircraft for the first time. You're getting to solo for the first time. I remember we were behind in training, and one Saturday we had to fly on a Saturday, which is always a little bit of a bummer, but it was my solo. It's just how it had scheduled out. It was my solo in the T-38, which is like the jet trainer. Yeah. The one that you see NASA use for astronauts. And so it's a fun little airplane. And I had this kind of pinch me moment where I was like, it's a Saturday afternoon. I am cruising around over the countryside of Mississippi in a fighter jet by myself. Like, what? Like, what is happening? But yeah, drop night came around, and my class ended up getting 2 fighter aircraft, and I was second in the people that were eligible. And so the guy that was first got F-15s, and I ended up getting F-16s, which is what I had put as my first choice.
Right.
So it's
Yeah. Oh,
exciting.
that's interesting. Yeah. And then what was it like to be an FC-16 pilot? And then kind of how did you transition to become a Thunderbird and that side of things?
At first, it was so much harder than I had imagined it possibly could be. So, you think fighter pilot and you're like, that's an awesome job. Like how fun. It sounds so sexy. Everyone's like, yeah, fighter pilots. And then you get there and it is a lot more complicated than just flying the amazing aircraft that everyone sees from the outside. That rapidly just becomes something you do without thinking about it. And all your attention goes to operating all the sensors in the jet, all the different pods, running the radios, talking to people on the ground, keeping situational awareness on who else is airborne and what they can do. And it is extremely complicated and it's high stakes, it's high pressure. So I definitely suffered from some serious imposter syndrome for quite a while, probably my whole first assignment in Japan. I was living in northern Japan, so far from my family. Your squadron is your entire community because I don't speak Japanese and most of the local people don't speak English. So you have no work-life separation. And there was definitely this period of me trying to find my footing of how I would fit in this culture. And kind of what I referenced before, my natural personality doesn't really have attributes that were valued in that community or that I initially felt were valued at the face value. And so I tried to hide them and I tried to be just like the guys. And it worked for a while, but I was just exhausted. And I eventually kind of hit a low point in that assignment where I honestly would have left if it was an option, like left the fighter jet community, which is crazy because I had wanted that so bad and I had worked so hard and it was so competitive to get there. And then I got there and I was like, oh, I don't belong here. I am not good enough. I don't fit in. And it was tough. And so I got to that point. I was like, well, I can't leave. I have a 10-year commitment after pilot training is what you owe the Air Force because they've spent so much time and money training you. And I was able to overcome that. I mean, I kept forging ahead because there weren't really any other options. But I moved to my next base, to my second assignment in Fort Worth, Texas. And kind of that transition from Japan was almost like this opportunity to reevaluate what I was doing and if I was happy and if I felt fulfilled, and also like recreate yourself. Like you're stepping into an environment where they've heard about you, but no one knows you. And so you get to present yourself however you want. And I kind of realized that I had really kind of shortchanged myself quite a bit that first assignment in Japan because I was so risk adverse, because I really felt like I had to prove myself. Like I couldn't show weakness. So I wouldn't take on any challenges that might come with failing in front of everyone. So when people would ask for volunteers to lead something or to, run a project or whatever, I would be in the back just like, please do not pick me for this. Please don't pick me. Please don't pick me. And not because I wasn't capable of doing it, but because it came with a chance of, the spotlight's on you at that point. You might fail. And so I kind of had this regret looking back at that first assignment where I was like, man, there were all these things I should have gone after that I didn't. And I'm not going to keep doing that. And so I kind of made just like a line in the sand. I was like, all right, new assignment, new unit, new people. Like, let's change that. Let's start showing up how I actually want to be. And I just started doing that in small ways, but over time, those ways got bigger. And my tolerance for taking on that risk and for doing the thing that felt, uncertain and scary became greater. And I ended up like, it was night and day between the first and the second assignment. I ended up doing really well at that assignment. I was, the flight commander for all of the active duty people there. I got to deploy to Afghanistan. I got to do some amazing things in my personal life with hobbies that I'd always wanted to try, like mountaineering and rock climbing, and taking on those kind of risky sports and learning them gave me confidence at work as well. And I got to go to Poland for a summer and fly their F-16s and instruct their pilots, which I could do a whole podcast episode just on that. But it was scary and challenging. And also I grew a ton. It gave me a lot of confidence, and kind of all of those things put me in a spot where at the very end of my time in Texas, I already had a follow-on assignment to go to New Mexico. And I saw an email from AFPC, the Personnel Center, which I tended to not actually open and read, but I opened that one and it said that the Thunderbirds were hiring. And it wasn't just, hey, hiring window is open. It was like, hey, we've already sent this out 3 times. This is the last notice. If you want to apply, applications are due next week. Of course, it was the first one that I had seen. So I scrolled down and for whatever reason, read what the requirements were and realized that I met all of them. And I kind of had this moment where I was like, oh, this feels exciting. Like, how cool would it be? Like, the flying looks really amazing. Also, the mission is really incredible. And I knew that not a lot of female pilots had flown for the team, and that with the team's mission being centered around recruiting, it's really powerful to have that representation. Any other squadron, it doesn't really matter. But that squadron, it has a huge impact on girls, like young girls and young women. And like, there's just nothing more rewarding than being able to inspire someone in that way. And so I felt really drawn to applying, but I also had the other half of me that was like, oh man, talk about failing on a public platform. Like, this is going to be challenging. Everyone's watching, like the public's watching. Other fighter pilots have mixed opinions on the Thunderbirds. Like, and it was kind of this internal war, but I was able to reflect on kind of that promise I'd made to myself at the beginning of that assignment, that I was going to go after things, and I didn't want to regret not trying. And I was like, no, this is like exactly the kind of thing that you should say yes to. Like, in your gut, you know you want this. Like, don't let your fear talk yourself out of it. And went to my boss and was like, hi, sir, I know I've literally never mentioned the Thunderbirds in a single conversation in 3 years, and I already have an assignment that I'm supposed to move to in 3 months, and this application's due in 5 days. But what do you think? And he was awesome. And he's like, I think you'd be great for the Thunderbirds. Like, what do we need to do? Let's get this application in. And I ended up applying and getting hired.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that, that advice of just to go for it, and you kind of found your way to do that. And it's clearly, paid off to be you were only the 5th ever female pilot in the Thunderbirds. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And the team's been around for 70 years.
Wow, yeah. And then you were lead solo. Tell us about what that is, and then kind of about the Thunderbirds and kind of what do you do? What are the Thunderbirds?
Yeah, so the Thunderbirds are the Air Force's demonstration team. In the United States in general, we have 2 jet demo teams. We have the Thunderbirds with the Air Force, and we have the Blue Angels with the Navy. And that's it. And they're, the biggest recruiting tool for both branches, other than maybe the Navy can claim the Top Gun movie is probably a huge recruiting tool as well. But we do generally air shows from March to November is show season. And we're in a different city every weekend doing 2 shows, one Saturday, one Sunday, some international stuff as well. And you have, about 9 months of just almost like being a band on tour. It's a crazy schedule. You're on the road all the time. But you're also getting in front of millions and millions of people, which when we see the statistics at the end of a season, it's just crazy to know that many people saw the jets fly and watched, and hopefully were inspired by it. So you're really a public affairs tool. But there's also, beyond recruiting, there's this mission around inspiration, where it's an opportunity for the American public to really connect with the military in a way, because if they don't have someone in their family or they didn't serve, which when you're on active duty, you lose perspective on how many people just don't know what the military is like. Like, it's really still a very small percentage of the population. And so it gives them an opportunity to see the precision and what we can really do as a team. And I think it gives them faith in the military, where their taxpayer dollars are going. And so that's a huge part of it as well. And as far as kind of how the demo is made up, there's 6 aircraft that people would see any given weekend at an air show. And when those 6 jets fly all close together in like a triangle type formation, which is what people would see if they've ever seen us do a flyover. We did a flyover for the Super Bowl when I was on the team, Daytona 500, that kind of thing. That formation is called the Delta, when all 6 jets are together. The position that I flew was the left solo, which means any of the photos of the Delta that you see from the time I was on the team, which was 2019 through 2021, I'm the very far left aircraft in those photos. But I was also the posing solo initially my first year, and then I ended up doing 3 years. And so the second and third year, I was the lead solo, which means I moved from kind of the solos are almost like this two jet separate formation. When the Delta is not all together, all six of us, you have the four aircraft that are in the middle called the Diamond, and they're together most of the show. But the other two, the outriggers, are the solos, and we will often split off and we'll do single aircraft maneuvers to really show what the F-16 is capable of. So super low stuff, upside down stuff, stuff right below the speed of sound. So we're talking, over 600 miles an hour. High G maneuvers. So I would do a max turn, which I would hit up to 9 Gs for that. And so for layman's terms, that means you feel like you weigh 9 times as much as you do sitting right here at 1 G. So that's hard on the body. So, but also super fun. We would also do the head-on passes, what we call opposing passes. It looks like a game of chicken, like the jets are going to hit, but don't worry, we have some separation between us. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's optics. But really, the solos bring kind of the shock and awe to the audience, and I think the Diamond brings a little bit more like graceful, beautiful formation flying. And then same with the Delta when we're all together, it's really impressive as well. But it's about a 40-minute show, and I had watched a couple air shows last year as a spectator after flying hundreds and hundreds of shows for 3 years, and I still got that same feeling of goosebumps and that little bit of like cringe as the two solos pass each other head on, even though I literally have done that 1,000 times and I know exactly how it works. So it's pretty cool for the public to get to experience the military in that kind of format.
Right, absolutely. And it takes, as a spectator, it takes your breath away. You can't, it's almost unbelievable, that these, powerful aircraft are so low and so close together. How did you kind of keep up your skill sets to do those maneuvers? Because I'm sure, flying missions, over Afghanistan, obviously there's so much risk involved with that. But being a Thunderbird, I imagine, has a little bit a different skill set as far as kind of the air maneuvers. What is the difference and kind of how did you keep your skills up for that?
Yeah, it's such different flying. When you join the team, you go through training season, which is the time of the year where there aren't any air shows. So a lot of people assume that when it's not March through November, that we kind of get like a break. That is definitely not the case. That's like the learning season for anyone that's new to the team, which every winter, half of those 6 pilots are brand new to the team. It's usually a 2-year gig. So it's like a 50% turnover rate each year, which is, it's just crazy. And so those 4 months are spent, learning to fly this crazy type of flying that you've never done before. Even I had already flown the F-16 for 7+ years at that point, and it still was very challenging for me. And then you have people coming from other fighter airframes, like my opposing solo. When I was lead solo, he had grown up flying F-22s. So he had to learn to fly the F-16 just to be part of the Thunderbirds. So you add that as well. And we just don't fly super close formation in combat squadrons much. You do it occasionally for very specific things, but not often. And even when you do it, you are flying generally upright and level and straight. You'll do turns, but they're very gradual. You are not doing a loop, a roll. You're not flying upside down with another jet, really close to you, so it looks like your tails are touching. Like, you're just not doing anything like that. And we also do all of that very close to the ground. Generally in combat squadrons, when we would fly what we call a low level, we would be at 500 feet above the ground.
Wow.
Which felt pretty low. But then I go to the Thunderbirds and my minimum altitude is 100 feet.
Wow.
And now I'm not just flying straight, I'm flying upside down at 100 feet, right? So it's just, even as an experienced fighter pilot, it is mind-blowing at first. And you really have to fight through your survival instinct, because you're like, oh, I don't want to be this close to this other airplane. Oh, I don't want to be this close to the ground. And you have to do almost like sensory overload to get past that and desensitize yourself to this fear that you just naturally have of self-preservation, and it just takes some time. But once you get through that, we fly so much, the team is practicing so often that your skills are just being constantly honed, and the team gets noticeably better from the start of show season in March till the end. Like I'm actually going to see them fly this weekend. It'll be the first time this season, and by this point in the year, they're going to be really dialed in. They're going to look really good. Their formations are going to be really tight. Timing's going to be really good, just because you have so much repetition. And so I I applied to the Thunderbirds after flying the F-16 for over 6 years with, I think, 800 and something hours of flight time. And then I spent 3 years with the Thunderbirds. And when I left, I was just shy of 2,000 hours total flight time. So that tells you how much the Thunderbirds fly compared to a normal squadron. It's a ton.
Right. Yeah. To get that many hours in just a couple of years, that really is amazing. Yeah. And tell us what you're doing now. I'm so excited. I have your book here.
Yes.
Upside Down Dreams. But tell us kind of, when you walked away from the Thunderbirds, kind of where are you finding yourself now, and kind of what's important to you about, sharing your experiences?
So my time on the Thunderbirds was coming to an end regardless. I actually did an entire bonus year because the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in hiring and experience levels and all the things. And so I knew that was coming to an end. Most people, when they're done on the team, they either go back to a combat squadron, still flying fighter aircraft, or they get out and they go fly for the airlines. Those are pretty much the two things that people do. I did neither of those. I kind of knew I was ready to shift from active duty and have a little bit more control of my life. I had met my husband and gotten married while I was on the Thunderbirds as well. Do not recommend meeting your spouse and getting married just 2 months into your first show season when you're on the road 240 days a year for the first 3 years of marriage. I also had a stepson, and just trying to balance that more, and family was becoming a much bigger priority than it had been. But I think the biggest thing is that unexpectedly, coming to the Thunderbirds, I found that I was really, really passionate about being able to help other people and being able to kind of be a catalyst for them, to push them to go after big dreams and big goals that they wanted, but didn't necessarily believe in themselves enough to pursue. And you're just in such a unique position as a Thunderbird pilot, and especially as a female Thunderbird pilot, to do that specifically for girls and women. And it was the most rewarding thing I had ever experienced, having those interactions where I could see this like light bulb moment happen for a 7-year-old girl who just realized that I had flown that jet she had just watched. And it was like the look of wonder and realization on their faces when their moms would drag them up and be like, look, like she just flew that jet. Because sometimes they wouldn't put 2 and 2 together. And when they did, it was like this light turned on, and they realized that so much more was possible for them in the world than they had thought just a few minutes prior. And like, what a cool position to be in, to be able to do that for people. And so selfishly, it's like when you give someone a really amazing gift that they love, that dopamine hit that you get, I got to do that all the time. And so as my time on the team came to an end, I was like, how can I continue to do this? And I had been asked to speak quite a few times while I was flying for the Thunderbirds, and I just couldn't do it while I was on active duty. I didn't have the time, and it's really not allowed to go. You can't be paid, at least, to go speak. So I knew there was potentially a business opportunity there to be a keynote speaker where I could be an entrepreneur, I could work for myself, I could have full creative control, and I could also fully do this mission of inspiring and empowering other people. And so that became kind of the foundation of my business, which is also called Upside Down Dreams. Made it as confusing as possible because the book you referenced is a children's book that is also called Upside Down Dreams. And it's actually the first of 3 in a 3-book series. So there'll be a couple more coming out over the next couple years. But the idea for that children's book had started my first season on the Thunderbirds at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. I was there in uniform, and I went to the bookshop and has all this amazing space and aviation stuff. But I was looking at the children's books, and there just weren't many with a female main character that wanted to be a pilot or was a pilot. you had the historical ones like Amelia Earhart and that kind of thing, but there wasn't anything where a little girl standing in that bookstore could see herself. And I was like, I want to change that. I'm going to write a book about a little girl that wants to be a fighter pilot. The publishing world is a strange place that I didn't really have an understanding of. And so it took me a lot of no's, a lot of no responses from literary agents and publishers. Luckily, the silver lining of the pandemic is that gave me some more free time to work on the book and get the manuscript written. And then I finally found a publisher right after I left active duty, and the book got published here a few months ago, and it's done extremely well. The response has been amazing. If I ever have a bad day, I could just go read the reviews on Amazon, and they're just like the most heartwarming thing ever about, my daughter has asked to read your book every night for the last 13 days. I'm like, sorry about that, but also that's awesome. So I'm now an author and a speaker, and being an entrepreneur has been such a learning experience. There's so much I didn't know about running a business, but I've just been lucky to connect with so many incredible people and build a really amazing team around myself. And I have as many pinch me moments now as I did when I was flying fighters. And I honestly feel like more professionally fulfilled than I have ever in my adult life, which can be hard for people to believe because I came from such what's considered a prestigious job and position. But man, it is really cool to be able to show up to work every day and feel like you're just driven by purpose, and you get to see how you impact people positively on a regular basis firsthand. You get to see it on their faces, and it's just so rewarding. I have zero regrets of the decision to pivot.
All right. Yeah. Well, and it's such a gift to have your voice and have your experience and be that kind of conduit for what's possible for people, especially young girls. I don't think all of us are aware of the opportunities. Like you said, that's sometimes just not in the realm of thinking. When you're a young kid, that I could be a fighter pilot. It's just, I don't know. It's amazing that you're doing that. And do you have any? I think your whole experience gives a lot of insights. But do you have specific advice for young girls or young kids that want to go either in the military or become a fighter pilot? What advice would you have for them, I guess?
Yeah, there's like the really specifics I could get into with a fighter pilot, but I think the biggest piece of advice that I give to young people as well as adults, and this is like, it's kind of one of those things that we all sort of know, but we forget, is, you get put on a pedestal when you fly for the Thunderbirds, and people see kind of like the shiny finished product, but they don't see all the struggles behind the scenes. They don't see the journey to get there. They don't see the doubt, the nervousness before shows, like none of that. And I've been probably more than anyone that I know of, very just open with people about that. Just very vulnerable. Like I'm going to tell you all the issues I had, all the like moments that were hard, because I want them all to realize that no one, like, they admire all these people, but none of those people had a roadmap that told them the answers. Every single one of us is figuring it out as we go. And that feels uncertain. It feels scary. There's moments you're going to doubt yourself. But I think especially when you're young, when you're either a kid or you're a young adult in a new career, you can look ahead at leaders in your company or professional athletes or Thunderbird pilots or whoever, and think that they were just born with like some natural attribute that has given them this roadmap. There's of course levels of talent, but no one has that. No one has that magic 8 ball. And so I really just try to tell people, like, the key to progress is having the courage to start something when you're not ready, but believing in yourself enough to know you will figure it out along the way. That's it. Like, there's no special sauce. It is just being willing to stumble your way through it, and being willing to take that first step and then take another step tomorrow and then another step the next day, and know that you are strong enough to deal with whatever obstacles are going to pop up along the way.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing advice. And I guess, given your perspective, what advice would you give to maybe more senior leaders or even more senior industry people, kind of about, you or your experience or your generation coming up, what can they learn from your perspective, I guess?
Yeah, I think I had exposure to some really amazing leaders and to some that were the opposite. I think most people in the military experience both extremes. And I think the thing, people will often be like, the best pilots in the world get hired to the Thunderbirds. And I always want to emphasize that it's really a whole person concept that the team's looking for. And some of the most tactically talented pilots that I knew that moved into leadership roles weren't necessarily the best leaders to work for. And the best leaders really cared about their people. And I know there's always in the military, there's always the conversation about people versus mission, right? Like, how do we do one? Which one's more important? Like, how do we prioritize them? And, the people do the mission. And I think it's the little things of getting to know your people, knowing when they're struggling, knowing what their aspirations are, that make such a huge difference. And for me, it was, going to my boss with 5 days before the Thunderbird applications were due, and also having this apprehension around whether or not I was actually good enough to apply to the team, and being like, hey, sir, surprise. And him, instead of, it would have been so much easier for him to be like, Mace, you kind of missed the boat on this one. You're about to go to Holloman. We don't really have a lot of time for application. You should probably apply next year. Like, the conversation would have been over, and that workload for him would have been done. Instead, he knew me and he believed in me even when I didn't. And he literally said, would you like to apply for the Thunderbirds? I think you would be an amazing Thunderbird pilot. And him like being willing to do that, which came with some extra work for him because he did a lot to help me get that application done in the next few days. I mean, I made a lot of phone calls, sent a lot of emails. But being willing to take the time and prioritize my needs in that moment over whatever fires he surely was dealing with as the commander, was just something I'm so grateful for. And it's just one of those conversations that sticks out as such a pivotal moment, because putting that application in and then getting hired set in motion events that completely changed my life. And that one conversation is a very specific pivotal point that I can see where it could have easily gone the other way.
Right. And I don't know that leaders always know how their being is so instrumental to somebody else's career. But given that that commander was open to your possibility and could see, how you could make a contribution, that's tremendous and set you on this path. So I love that was kind of, innately your experience, and it didn't shut down kind of your future. And I love that you're now sharing that kind of with the next generations. I don't know if people always understand that, women weren't allowed in combat roles. Women weren't allowed to be pilots. And I guess what would you say maybe to a young girl kind of to show them the kind of, there are more opportunities now, those rules aren't necessarily in place, although there's fewer numbers of female pilots, but I guess what outlook do you have, or what advice do you have for them kind of in that kind of world?
Yeah, so all of those roles are open on paper, right? But I think there's still so many barriers that people put in place that, keep the numbers kind of low. And a lot of it are assumptions that women ourselves make, just based on how society frames things. So a lot of girls still don't realize that they can be pilots, especially fighter pilots. And I mean, this happens way more than I wish it did. I had a little girl come up to me last summer. I was at EAA Oshkosh, this huge flying in Wisconsin, and I was in a green flight suit. And this little girl, she ended up being 11. I asked her how old she was, but she came up and she looked so downtrodden. She was looking at the ground. She was super like pulled in and meek. And she's like, excuse me. And I'm like, yeah, what's up? She's like, I have a question. What do I do if I want to be a pilot, but the boys at summer camp say girls can't be pilots? And she was just like devastated by these little jerks that, and the thing is that girls can be pilots. And the only reason they think that is either they've seen something that has shown them that in like the media, or their parents have told them that. And so there are still these ideas that are floated around. And like the girls need to know that that's not true, and then the boys need to know that that's not true, right? Like it's a two-part thing. Just making people realize that it's not an easy journey. There's a lot of work that you have to put in. And I mean, I knew this, like the odds are not in your favor, right? Like talk about 2 people out of 25 getting fighter aircraft in my class. But you're saying there's a chance. Like there is a possibility if you're willing to put the work in and do the research and keep pushing forward, even when things get tough, there is a chance. And so that's part of the thing that motivated me to write the book. It's part of what motivates me to do the stuff I do now, is to make sure that they know that it's an option. And not everyone's going to be a fighter pilot. Not everyone wants to be a fighter pilot, but I just want to know them all the possibilities so they can choose whatever their version of that is.
Right. Yeah. And I could talk to you all day and bend your ear. You're so lovely to talk to, and I could ask you tons of questions, but was there anything else you wanted to highlight or kind of offer from your perspective?
I think that, I mean, we've hit it quite a bit, but I really want people to realize that everyone feels that imposter syndrome sometimes. That, you know, I had it play a very big role for me, and it was kind of exacerbated by not feeling like I really belonged in the community I was trying to be part of. That can for sure make it worse. But I don't want them to confuse being new at something, going through the normal stress and anxiety and growing pains that come with learning something new and challenging. I don't want people to ever confuse that with them not being good enough to be there, not competent, not deserving, because I think those waters get muddied for a lot of people. And so that's why I share my stuff so openly, because I want to make sure that people don't give up when what they're going through is something that, you know, is completely normal. It's not a valuation of their ability. It's just what it's like to be new in something that's difficult. And turns out difficult things are the most rewarding.
Right. Oh, yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.